Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, здравствуйте. У нас в гостях очень важный гость. We've got very important guest here in the studio. His name is Stephen Jennings. He is the owner, he's the co-founder and founder of Renaissance Capital Group, one of the most famous, if not the famous, foreign businessmen in Russia. He has been in Russia for 10 years or so. He's going to tell you about that. Not even, no, 15 years or so. He is probably one of the most, if not the most successful, again, foreign businessmen. And I tried to bring my friend Steven for a couple of months here, especially after I've seen his impressive interview at Hard Talk show with Steven Sigur, I recall. Yes, of course, I am not Steven Sigur. I will not
much
ask
better.
You, yeah,
This will be much more interesting.
I will not ask you tricky questions.
BBC interview is very boring. This will be fun.
I will try to be controversial at least.
Пожалуйста.
Okay, привет. Okay, could you please start, because not all of our viewers know you, and so could you please explain where you born, blah blah blah. Tell you some bio.
Sure.
Quickly, maybe 5 minutes.
Yep. I'm a New Zealander. I was born in New Zealand. I grew up in the provinces from a very simple...
Village?
Not even village, on a farm.
Oh my God.
So quite humble and simple background. I'm from a very beautiful country. So I went to university. I did 2 degrees in economics. My first job was...
New Zealand.
In New Zealand, working for the New Zealand Treasury, which is like your Ministry of Finance. So I was involved in a huge amount of reform in New Zealand in the 1980s. I worked for the Minister of Finance. Then I went into the private sector in investment banking in New Zealand and Australia. My firm was bought by CS First Boston. So I moved with them first to London, and then I came to Russia in 1992.
Together with Boris Jordan, was it Nicholas Jordan?
Boris was even here a little bit before me.
Okay. And then how you evolve from the worker of Credit Suisse, was it Credit Suisse Boston, right?
Yeah.
And to your own business.
You know, to do anything.
This is the most specific question we always have on the comments. So it's like, okay, the guy is telling he's been working for someone, and then he creates something. So.
As you know, to do anything in the early 90s in Russia, you had to be an entrepreneur. Absolutely anything. So imagine trying to build the first investment bank. Because when I came here, there was no private ownership. There was no securities regulation. There was absolutely no market. Nothing existed. No buyers, no sellers, no exchanges.
I think Troika Dialog does already exist, no?
No.
No?
No. There was literally no public company in Russia. So the first thing we did was the voucher auctions, the privatizations. So we privatized the first companies, and then on the back of that we created the voucher market. On the back of that we did the first equity trading. So you had to be an entrepreneur.
Do you think it was, by the way, do you think it was a good idea of Chubais to having this, taking this path of privatization, this through the vouchers and stuff? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm very biased because I was involved, but yes, I very strongly believe that the voucher privatization was the right thing.
So you think that was the only way to redistribute the public property into the private property?
I think assets had to be put into private hands very quickly, and we had to unleash the potential of private ownership. So some of the later aspects of privatization, loans for shares, had some very questionable aspects to them. But voucher auction, it was very transparent, everyone could participate, the process was clean, and it moved 5,000 large companies in less than 3 years. So it was a very sort of historic movement of assets into the private sector. And if you look at what's happened in Russia in the last 20 years, all the value has been created in the private sector. So I think it's very lucky that happened. Okay.
And then you established with your partners Renaissance Capital, right?
Then we built, Russia became the second most profitable country in the world for CSFB. So with a handful of people, virtually no capital, and with very little support from New York or London or anywhere else. So basically we realized we were building the business. We had to become entrepreneurs, we were entrepreneurs. We weren't really very dependent on support from the rest of the world. So we said to ourselves, why do we need these bureaucrats and all these forms we need to fill in every day? Let's just do this on our own. So one day, 30 of us left, and we started to build our own investment bank.
30? What a spin-off. Okay. And where did you get the capital? From your bonuses?
We knew an Exim.
Ah,
We
Potanin.
knew Mr. Potanin and Michael Prokhorov.
Mhm.
So they gave us some cash and we gave them a 20% shareholding in the business.
So this is comeback for Michael, okay.
And that was seed capital. That was our seed capital.
Mhm. Okay. And then you've been involved in the very first public offering, no? Was it you or?
Yeah, we did Vimpelcom.
Vimpelcom was
In
you, right?
1996 was the first ever London Stock Exchange listing for a Russian company.
Vimpelcom, I think it's New York, no?
Yeah, NYC. Yeah,
No, you said
but everything
London.
was a first. Everything was a first in those days. First
Mhm.
privatization, first M&A deal, first IPO.
But you
first
still had some competition from Troika, didn't you?
the market was very concentrated. There were only a small number of players.
There was an American guy, right, who was running this Troika. I forgot his name.
Bernie Sucher was at
Mhm.
Troika. He was one of the pioneers.
Mhm. Why he left Russia? He fed up, or?
Maybe he's having a break. He's a very good guy. He achieved
Yeah.
a lot of things.
By the way, why don't you take the break? Because being one of the richest New Zealanders, as far as I remember, I read it somewhere, you can afford just to come back to a beautiful country, build the biggest ever house, buy a beautiful yacht, and finally enjoy your life and go around the New Zealand, or even come to Fiji and enjoy yourself. Why are you still fighting here? What makes you stand up
No, I
early
like-
morning and go to the,
'Cause
to
I
the
like-
office through the smoke in Moscow, through the pollution and stuff like that?
Well, I like Moscow, but that's another story.
You like pollution,
No, I like Moscow. I like Moscowites.
traffic, jam. No,
You know,
really.
if you want to
Wh-
play-
what makes you still to be here? What makes
Well,
you?
it's like a
wake
sport.
up?
You know, if you want to
I like
compete,
sport.
you have to compete. So if you want to play the game, you've got to be
So you've got to
ready.
win.
You've got to compete. You've got to try and win.
But to
so-
me, you won a couple of times.
You know what? But I enjoy it. So I enjoy building things. I enjoy creating teams of people.
Mhm.
I like building different things in different places. It's hugely satisfying for me. But I like competing also.
Mhm.
So this combination.
What's your sport? Because that was one of the questions from Twitter. They want the guys. They want to know what is your sport.
Yeah,
Rugby, right?
our national game is rugby.
Okay.
We're the world champions as of 2
Congratulations.
months ago. So
French, yeah. You've been
we
French.
just beat France.
Yeah.
So this is part of our culture. So from the age of 5, I grew up playing rugby, and it's really part of the culture and the
Mhm.
mentality.
So you have to fight and fight and fight.
It's a very physical game, and yeah, you have to fight. Yep, it's the equivalent you have here is ice hockey. Very
Yeah.
physical, very competitive.
Cool. Some of the people lately, even some journalists and some our colleagues, they are saying that the best times for Renaissance Capital is over. How you can comment on that?
You know, businesses go in cycles. In 20
I
years,
said I don't want to be sigur, but I try to be
Yes.
controversial.
in the last 20 years, I've heard that so many times, and actually, I like to hear that. So
No, I think
That's a
credit
challenge in
was
itself.
no doubt is just like household name. It was for the investment banking. It was the name. It was everybody afraid you, everybody respect you, and so on and so forth. 2000 to 2008, and last 2-3 years, it seems like there's you have some concern with your strategy, with your partners, and stuff like that. So
I think it's just
Don't you
another.
think-
I think at the beginning of every cycle, a lot of people talk a very big game about what they're going to do. Every cycle, the market structure has changed, and it's a matter of going through and seeing who has the best products, who's the most determined.
But you still believe in independent investment bank in Russia?
Yeah, even more so than ever,
Hmm.
because we have, like everything, we have a certain, like your business, there's a certain segment for the state.
Mhm.
The state has strengths, the state has weaknesses. There's a limited piece for the foreigners, because the foreigners are not very committed.
Mhm.
And there's a big piece for someone who's very committed and very entrepreneurial.
Mhm.
And being imagine the only real private sector investment bank in a country as big as Russia. It's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and talking about foreigners, and also a bit controversial again, but foreigners are more bureaucratic. Because for us back days we were thinking like it's a role model. So the foreigners, what they do, we've got to copy. But at the end of the day, now what we see that the foreign banks, at least in our sector, and I'm sure investment, they're more bureaucratic.
Much more bureaucratic. They're not committed. Their
yes.
decision makers aren't here. The decision makers are.
And basically they lost the Russian. At least on the commercial banking scene, there is no. Maybe OTP and home credit. Those only
But I don't think the
examples,
investment banking is so different. The decision maker is in London or New York, and now that they have huge problems themselves, they're retreating.
But
they're
I
protecting
think the
core.
threat you're going to have, or you're already having, are from VTB obviously, and from Sberbank Troika now. So that's your biggest.
But there's
threat.
always someone. There's always some competitor. Every cycle, it's somebody else. It used to be Troika. It used to be UBS. Used to be a powerhouse.
Yeah.
Deutsche used to be a powerhouse. I've seen Goldman Sachs. I've seen them close their office here.
But
three
they've never
times.
been powerhouse in Russia though.
No, but they
They're my
talk-
partners, by the way.
They talked a very big game at various times. So the first time I was flying to Russia in '92, I was flying on the plane with very senior people from Goldman. So we've seen all these competitors come and go so many times. But in our business, being there consistently year in, year out, it's very, very important. And then we diversified enormously. We diversified into other industries, forestry, consumer finance, agriculture in Ukraine. We bought assets and built businesses right through Africa, which really is the frontier of the emerging markets now.
That's the right time.
So off that platform, we built a lot of other businesses and assets.
That's the right time to ask you about Africa. So what do you think about differences and similarities between Russia's 92 and Africa these days? Are they more advanced, or were we pygmies at that time, or are they now, where are we at now?
Yeah,
Could you compare those two markets?
It's always important.
Russia 92 and then?
It's always important in Russia to remind people of the differences. Obviously, Russia is a very sophisticated and highly cultured and highly educated society. So it's almost unique globally in that perspective, from that sense. So Africa, you can't even begin to compare. But what is similar is that Russia had its economic takeoff in the 90s, over the last 15 years. Africa's economic takeoff has started now. So the thing that is similar is these very, very high growth rates. Africa is the second fastest growing region in the world. It's growing only slightly slower than Asia. So within a couple of years, it'll be the fastest growing region in the world. And because it's so poor, that growth can continue for a very long time. So that's where the parallel is.
And what about natural resources? They also reach the natural resources. There's also comparison, right?
Huge natural resource endowment across many different asset classes.
So Russia is all about oil, and what do we have there?
You have everything.
Minerals.
You have oil, gas, copper, coal, agriculture, every mineral class you can think of. But Africa is not primarily about natural resources. In 2009, after the crisis, Africa was the only region in the world that didn't have a single quarter of negative GDP growth.
Is that your strategy? I'm kind of trying to think your way. So your strategy is you came 92, so you succeed, you won. And now you try to replicate same model or do exactly the same in Africa. You feel it's now just in time in Africa. Is that?
Yes and no. Yes, because it's the time to go and buy cheap assets and build businesses where there's not very much competition. But no, because Russia and Africa are becoming part of the same world. So when a market starts, you can have an investment bank that is just in one country. It could be Spain, it could be England, it could be Russia. As the markets develop, the attractiveness of that model ultimately diminishes. Because as the country becomes integrated into the global capital markets, as a one country player, you have huge weaknesses. So if you want to be a powerful investment bank, you've got to work across many emerging markets today. So the strategy, the attractiveness of Africa on a standalone basis reinforces structurally what we have to do in the investment bank. We have to be a multi-regional emerging market investment bank. Otherwise, we'll be a tiny niche player.
But would you admit that you had a mistake going to Ukraine?
No, I don't think so. No. We're one of the big players in agriculture in Ukraine.
I know we bought a lot of land.
That business will do...
Which doesn't worth now a lot, what I understand, right?
Well, we'll do EBITDA of around $90 million this year on a relatively small investment. So highly profitable, highly cash generative, big growth and consolidation opportunities. So no, that business has been very, very successful for us. And the whole agricultural sector, if there's one sector where Ukraine has done much better than Russia, it's agriculture actually.
By the way, Africa, we know your results from Renaissance Credit in Russia, which has been recently published. And for those who don't know, they go online and check it. We know you just mentioned results in Ukraine. What about Africa? You're making money there at this point? Or
Yeah, we've had
Kevin,
really,
or
yeah, in the investment
losing a
bank
bit?
we're making money, but imagine we went very early and bought assets at a very early stage. Now Africa is very fashionable, it's in vogue. But when we went there, it wasn't. So we bought a lot of natural resources, we bought a lot of real estate. So we're one of the largest owners of real estate on the African continent. We're building 6 large cities, for example. So those assets have revalued, dozens and dozens of times in some cases since we bought them.
And I see now your another wing of your Renaissance Capital, Renaissance Credit, as one of the most growing Russian retail bank, as a locomotive for your Russian business. Is that true? Is Renaissance Credit one of your now most important and is it locomotive of your whole business?
I wouldn't say it's a locomotive, but again, we're very happy with the progress there.
Because it used to be kind of spin-off. It was just kind of, as far as I remember, it was your, I wouldn't say toy, but it was just, okay, let's try. But it seems like now it's your main business in terms of net income.
The investment bank gave us the capital and the relationships and the access to build other big businesses. So the forestry business is the largest log exporter in the world to China, for example.
Far East, right?
But it took time to build these businesses and get scale. We started building most of these businesses around 7, 8 years ago. So now they're all quite big, they're all cash generative and very profitable, which means we have a much more diversified group.
What's your strategy on Renaissance Credit? You would like to grow it, would like to sell it, or what do you want to do eventually with it?
We're positive. I mean, I don't need...
Merge 50 CS?
I think you know the answer to that question. But we're going to have good growth in Russia. The financial service industry is very undeveloped. Household debt's very low. The competitive environment, the foreigners are leaving. There's not a lot of players with strong technology. You do, but there's not many other players. So the growth potential for the next few years, as you know, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
so we like that sector.
Perfect. So time for the Twitter question. Why Renaissance is not investing in very hot IT sector? It's a good question to me, because I really think the IT sector is very cool now.
Yeah, we have.
Sexy.
We have from time to time. We were very early shareholders in DST. So very.
You should have been sitting there.
Yeah, and we did sit there for quite some time. So we sold that about 18 months ago. So we do make investments from time to time, but we had, through a fund and with our own capital, we were DST shareholders quite early on. So from time to time, we do look.
And philosophical question: are you happy with having such amount of money yourself, personal wealth?
I think
Are you happy?
I think you also know the answer, because I think if
I probably do, but the rest would like to hear it.
I think if you're motivated primarily by money, let alone only by money, it's a very limited motivation, and it's a very strange motivation. So personally, I'm not a especially materialistic person. I like to build things. I like to create things. I like to have a nice lifestyle, but to have a nice lifestyle, there's a limit to how much money you need. So building something that you're proud of and your team's proud of, where you can stand back and say, we really created something, that's more important for me.
And then the next question would be from me in this case. Can you tell me, being an expat, being the foreigner in Russia, what is the mystic? What about Russian women? Why all of the most of the foreigners eventually ended up married Russian woman? So what's the mystic about this?
So at last you're asking the most important question. Now the interview gets serious, right?
Yes, finally.
They are clearly extremely beautiful. Very, very beautiful.
Because you have a lot of women as an audience. I would like them to hear
Okay.
what's biasing.
Well, everybody knows that I'm speaking the truth when I say this. They are incredibly beautiful. You know, I think Western women, they've been taught not to really be women, not to be too feminine, not to show their feminine side, not to show their soul. So the Western women, they've lost a lot of their femininity.
Why?
It's the way of the Western world, unfortunately. Whereas Russian women are very happy being women. They're very comfortable expressing their femininity. So you have this
To have high heels and stuff, right?
in every respect.
Yeah.
And like Russians generally, they have very rich souls. You know, Russians are very rich people inside. So this combination packaged in a woman, it's a pretty hard thing to turn down.
Good answer. What would be your description of the word entrepreneur? Who is entrepreneur? What's your description?
I think an entrepreneur has to be a little bit crazy, because you have to imagine something or some way of doing things that other people can't see and typically don't believe in. That's probably 10% of the equation. The other 90%, you have to have the energy and the drive to turn that idea or that concept into something tangible. I think they're the two ingredients.
Okay, and why Russia? Why you love Russia? Or if you love Russia, and if you love, why you love Russia? What for?
Yeah, I do love Russia because, and I think any foreigner, you can't live, and I've lived here for nearly 20 years.
20.
So I don't think anyone could live in a country for so long and be happy if there wasn't something about the people in the country that they really like. So you have to like the people, or you can't live somewhere for so long. From the first few weeks, I liked Russians. So they're very talented. Excuse my French, but the bullshit factor is very low. They're very direct. They're very warm. They don't suffer fools. So if you're an idiot, they will tell you, probably to your face. But they're very loyal. They're very deep. They're very interesting people. And then you have Russia. Russia is big, complex, and challenging. So if you want a big opportunity, that is a huge challenge. There's not many better places to go in the world. So you have this challenging environment with a lot of opportunity, with very interesting people.
But then why Russians are not as entrepreneurial as Western people, and why we are so far haven't achieved yet anything big on the global scene? However, Yuri Miller and some others start to show that we can do things. I'm not talking Abramovich to buy Chelsea or anything like that. But why do you think we are behind in this?
I don't necessarily agree that Russia is behind in that respect. I think the people,
Because I just went to San Francisco. I'm sorry interrupting you. I just went to San Francisco 2 weeks ago, and I met lots of Americans there. I mean, it's just different level of people. They're all about money, all about entrepreneurship, all about to create something, to create value for customers or for themselves. It's all about money there, all about to sell. And when in Russia, it's not. It's maybe one of the 10th.
Maybe in a narrow commercial sense, they're more entrepreneurial, but you have to be entrepreneurial just to survive and get by and adapt in Russia. And we have to remember that for business, the environment we have here, it's a very hostile, it's a very tough and challenging environment. If you take our Russian entrepreneurs, you put them on the same environment as people have in the West, I think they'll do just as well. You have to be very good as an entrepreneur to survive and be successful here. I don't think it's about the people. I think we know that the laws are very challenging, the bureaucracy is very challenging, the corruption is challenging, the financial markets are extremely undeveloped, let's face it, for small businesses. So this is a very tough environment for entrepreneurs.
And that's a very good next question. What do you think is Russia's biggest country risks? You just named some of them, but maybe what would be the biggest for you, for Renaissance, for Stephen Jennings, or for other Russian entrepreneurs and businessmen?
No, I think, it's a slightly...
1, 2, 3. Corruption, obviously, or not? Give you a list.
More fundamental in a way, and it's a slightly sensitive subject today, but the political system will have to evolve in Russia. And it is going to evolve, because the pressure for change, will only get greater and greater. And in today's world, it's not possible to suppress that pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope it evolves in a smooth way, in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the biggest risk is that, you know, we have some disturbance or disruption. And I don't mean in the short term. I mean more in the medium term about how the political system modernises.
Mm-hmm.
But as the political system modernises, all the other issues that we'd talk about, the bureaucracy, the corruption, problems in the financial services industry, then they'll begin to be addressed. So they're all, in a way, the issues are all in a way linked to that problem.
Often we are being compared by local media and especially foreign media to the African country, our political system to the African political systems and corruption, stuff like that. So what do you think, where we are at, I mean, between Africa and Russia? Are we behind, or are we really between those country number 190 to 92, or we still, because you're dealing with the local governments here and there. What do you think? Are we really pygmies?
There's not a linear comparison like that. Because Russia's history, it's so special, it's so unique. The starting point is so different. So you can't line these countries up and just make a linear comparison. Russia has huge advantages, but it also has some challenges which are specific to Russia's history. But as civil society gets stronger, as institutions get stronger, the political system will be forced to change. And we're living in a world, it's a cliche, but it's factually true. Change is accelerated, economic change is accelerated.
But if we will have in Russia the, how do you call it, thumb of rule or no?
Rule of law.
Rule of law, sorry. When we will have in Russia a rule of law, and when we will have established and modernized political and other government institution, then the margin for the businesses are going to...
Absolutely. But let me ask you one question.
So you want this, you want to be here, the only foreigner, make a lot of money and repatriate the cash and go out of here. Why you want Russia to be westernized? Then your margin going to suppress.
I don't believe in this concept of westernization. As you said at the very beginning, the days when people look to the West and Western business, Western political systems have all the answers. It's history. The West dominance, it's in the past now. And increasingly there'll be new models, which will be emerging market models. Yeah, they'll borrow some ideas from the West, but they're not going to be carbon copies of what happened in the West. So I think Russia will develop its own path. Let me ask you a question. Okay. How many countries in the world do you think were democracies 100 years ago, where every man and woman had the right to vote?
100 years ago.
I'll tell you.
What, maybe 20?
None. Zero.
No.
There was 0 countries with universal suffrage. New Zealand was the first country, and that was less than 100 years ago. So people talk about the West, but they don't even understand the West's own history. You know, the West had to deal with exactly the same kinds of issues, and it took them hundreds of years to develop their institutions, their courts, their democratic processes. It's happening here, but it's just happening much, much faster. And to always be looking at the West as a reference point, it's interesting, but it's not necessarily the most helpful way to look at things.
And of course, we are not going to remind them about Sir Francis Drake, right? And what he was doing in the Pacific Ocean. Okay. Okay, let's ask you. What was the most stupid purchase in your life? Anything?
We once bought another business in Ukraine. I don't even want to mention what it was, but it was the wrong idea. We didn't do our homework properly. We'd been having a lot of success. We were overconfident, and we just weren't diligent or disciplined enough.
Do you think are we similar Russians and Ukrainians? Are we really similar, or we're different from you?
Yeah, there are differences, obviously. Yep.
What?
Now you're asking difficult questions. Well, it's true, Ukrainians...
Because a lot of people are calling me and asking me to invest into Russia. They love the model of TCS bond. They say, you've got to come to Ukraine, you've got to invest, you're going to win here. But I'm kind of afraid I would call it mentality of local entrepreneurs. Let's phrase me this way. Any comments?
Yeah, I think politics is even less developed in Ukraine. I mean, some of the problems we have in Russia are probably even worse than in Ukraine. So, you know, the barriers to doing business overall, I think, if anything, are worse there. I think certain sectors, as I mentioned, agriculture, Ukraine has enormous comparative advantage in agriculture, and you can see that in the success of its strong local agricultural players. But I think in many other industries, the barriers are greater, and you don't have the scale. You know, the advantage that we have in our consumer finance businesses is the huge scale of Russia.
40 million versus what, 30?
Yeah, 40, but
40. Yeah.
but again, much lower per capita GDP. So the pie is much, much smaller.
What books you're reading now, or what books you suggest to read to the local businessmen?
Yeah, one really good book, and it's similar to what we've been talking about, which I just read. It's called Civilization: How the West Beat the Rest by Niall Ferguson from Harvard. And it's the story of how from nowhere, and in a world where incomes across different geographies were very even, several hundred years ago, the West became very, very ascendant. But the book is interesting, not so much in talking about the past, but in making you think about the future, because it makes you realise the things that created that ascendancy for the West, they're now being picked up by everybody else very, very quickly. So it tells you that we're going to return to a world where income differences around the world will be very small again, just as they were before the Industrial Revolution. Which means Asia, the countries with the huge population bases and the natural resources, will be the most interesting.
Okay, probably the last question from myself. You have a lot of intelligence around you and a lot of good brains and analytics. What would be the price of oil? That's the most important question of Russia. What would be the oil price 6 months from now? Give me the number.
You know, I think we're going to...
6 months. Not 3, not 9. 6 months from now.
Yeah. So if I have to say a number, I'd say $110, $115 per barrel.
You're bullish?
I'm bullish. Global GDP growth now is 4%. So there's no growth in Europe, but it doesn't matter. The global economy is growing at 4%. And that's why the spot oil price is so strong. And definitely there are supply constraints. There's been underinvestment in oil production. So I think for commodities generally, unless we have a complete crisis in Europe, we're looking at, you know, a favourable environment.
Okay. We have a kind of a rubric in this program, and then at the end of the program, the guest is telling straight to the camera, hey, you should tell the Russian entrepreneur and businessman, basically you have to encourage them to start doing their own business, not work for Gazprom or even for Renaissance Capital, sorry. You have to encourage them to do the business, and here's your camera. Tell them something from the most successful foreigners who has been living in Russia for over 20 years. Stephen Jennings here.
You know, I think if there's any country in the world you should want to be an entrepreneur, it's Russia, because there are many things that haven't been built. There are huge gaps in the economy. There are huge gaps in logistics and service areas. So the fundamental opportunity is there. At the same time, the environment and the constraints on building businesses is definitely going to go down over time. The external environment is going to improve in Russia. The question is, do you have the dream and do you have the drive? But if you have the dream and you have the drive, you know, you've got to do that, because that's what's going to give you a feeling of really having achieved your potential and realised what you've got inside you. That's what it's all about.
Okay, here was farmer from New Zealand, Stephen Jennings, at Hard Talk with Siberian villager Oleg Tinkov. Thank you. Спасибо.
Excellent.